Yeah, I think that empowerment comes from educating yourself on what is available. I think you have to know what to ask your architect and you have to know which design professionals to hire. If the homeowner can become more empowered to do research on building products and materials, weigh one HVAC system versus another, understand
Hmm.
what goes into the efficiency rating, then they
Hmm.
can become empowered to give their design professional the solution.
Hi, this is Jack Baldwin with Raynard Architectural Designs. I'm joined today by my friend Farah Kadir. Farah, how are you?
I am good. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm great. This is exciting. You're calling in from New York, or I'm sorry, from New Jersey area, right?
That's correct. Tri-state area,
The
New Jersey.
tri-state area, which I guess over in that part of the country, everything's New York, right?
Exactly. The world revolves around New York to some
Right. It's all just a metropolitan Manhattan. So
exactly.
I always love to hear people's personal stories, kind of your biography, what brought you to where you are today, and just kind of a who's who on Farah.
Yeah, so I'm a first generation Pakistani American and I'm originally from Staten Island, New York. It's often the forgotten suburb of New York City.
Right.
I grew up with a father who was a construction project manager and an engineer, so he was 100% my direct influence into the career path. But I attended a high school that was specialized in architecture and engineering, and I was part of the ACE Mentor program, which is a national program for high school students to get exposure to the industry. So for anyone who's listening, whose children might be interested in something similar, the ACE Mentor, I have to plug that. It's an awesome program.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I got my exposure to an architect and was able to shadow him, and we had a group project, and I got to do some collaboration on a conceptual design project.
Mm.
But I attended the City College of New York for a 5-year Bachelor of Architecture program, which is where I really dived in. Did not know what I was getting myself into with all those late nights, and
Yeah,
it was a memorable experience attending an architecture college in New York City because there was just a huge network and so much to be a part of.
yeah.
Um, I got involved with the AIAS, which is the student version of the AIA professional organization. I was president of that chapter and really grew some leadership skills. And at the same time, I was running the solar decathlon competition in my school. I was a leader for that. I guess I'll speak to a little bit more of that later. But
Yeah.
after college, I got involved in my first public sector job. It was an internship at the New York City Department of Design and Construction.
Mm.
Whereas a lot of my peers went straight into private after graduating, I stuck with government. And lo and behold, 10 years later, I'm still working with government. But
Interesting.
yeah, yeah.
That's a
After the,
that's a totally different world, isn't it?
oh yeah, it's I'd say fewer people go into government than the private sector for sure. But
Yeah.
it really opens your network up to so many different folks because you're working with so many different consultants and you're on the side of the profession where you can see the policy side and the decision making and some of that administrative bureaucracy. So you're getting a
Mm.
little bit of everything, I think. I'm at the New York City School Construction Authority right now, and I work in the Technical Standards Division where I do some compliance review with our green building standard and some stringent New York City green building local laws.
Mhm.
And essentially, what that means is I get to see a lot of trends in building. Prior to that, I was an energy code plans examiner at the New York City Buildings Department. So we were reviewing applications of all different scales, residential and commercial. And for me, that was a position to really see where some of the compliance strengths and weaknesses were.
Right.
Where was the industry able to excel with energy efficiency? What are they understanding? What are they not getting? What are the sections of the code that need revision? And so when you start to see consistencies in compliance, you can understand where buildings are trending and how they're performing because you're able to see, for example, the results of energy modeling and what's being projected. You know, you have your projection of energy consumption that's being given to you as part of a construction document set. So I was reviewing a lot of that and getting an idea of which building systems maybe needed a little bit more improvement in the code and which ones project teams were meeting.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's been all public sector work so far. So 2 city agencies, actually three, under my belt, and enjoying it so far.
Yeah. as you were figuring out your career path that brought you to where you are, what did you find inspiring? What did you find exciting, and what that was drawing you into your profession?
Yeah, so I have to revert back to the U.S. Department of Energy Solar Decathlon as an initial spark of inspiration. It's
Yeah,
100% how I got into environmental sustainability because as a college student, we were getting very hands-on and building this 1,000 square foot solar powered prototype home. And that's where I got that first look at collaborating with contractors and engineers and the energy engineering aspect and doing the calculations and seeing that all come to life with all the integrated building systems was super innovative and exciting and cutting edge. Um,
yeah.
so that was 100% first inspiration. But as I got into my career, I did a lot of journalism while I was in the
Mm.
decathlon. I'd always had a passion for writing,
Hmm.
and I think that communications background, which I continued in the decathlon as the lead for the public relations team, that has carried through, and that's why I'm in the technical standards specialty of architecture. Um, I really enjoy communicating concepts, and because I had to do it for the decathlon, and because I've had to do it professionally, as all of us architects do,
Yeah.
you kind of just you become a natural at it, and I just enjoyed it. The green building journalism that I do outside of my 9 to 5 allows me to understand different issues in the profession. Whether it's, I recently published something on zero waste and architectural firms and how waste can be a design issue that's tackled by
Mhm.
architects.
Yeah.
But that communications aspect is what led me to do code work. And that actually leads me to my next source of inspiration, which was
Yeah.
buildings department. The codes work I'm super fascinated by. There's so much in code interpretation and application, and so much that goes into each code revision cycle that I became really fascinated with helping out on that effort. And that's how I got involved with the ICC and the National
Hmm.
Building Standard. So just that merge of the communications background and the architectural background is what led me into standards updates, and it's kind of been my niche now for a while.
Really cool. So a lot of the people we work with at our company, Raynard Architectural Designs, we focus only on private homes. So we're doing custom homes, but some of the things that you were talking about with sustainability and green initiatives and thinking about the environment as people are designing, a lot of our clients are thinking about that. A lot of our clients are asking questions about how can they get the most energy efficiency out of their home? How can they get the most sustainability out of their home? How can they protect the world around them so that there is a home for others and future generations? Those are real questions that come up. We obviously are in a different sector than you are. But what kind of insights, if one of our clients was listening and one of a person who wants to design their own home and are thinking about green and thinking about energy, what are some things that they should be thinking about, or what could you share with them that they could be thinking about to get the most green impact out of their home in a positive way?
Yeah, I think that empowerment comes from educating yourself on what is available. Um,
Hmm.
there's two sides of this. So let's say you already have a home. Let's say you're not designing from scratch, but you have a home. Although this could apply to new construction as well. I think you have to know what to ask your architect, and you have to know which design professionals to hire. I think that huge knowledge gap is the reason why clients aren't empowered. They kind of trust their design professional, their architect, to guide them through the process. But
Hmm.
because a homeowner might not understand what technologies are out there, they're going to go with whatever the architect might be getting commission for or is comfortable with specifying. But
Yeah.
if the homeowner can become more empowered to do research on building products and materials, weigh one HVAC system versus another, understand
Hmm.
what goes into the efficiency rating, then they
Hmm.
can become empowered to give their design professional the solution. And
Hmm.
another part of this, is learning how to properly maintain your home. So once the home's been built, and I'm going to come at this through the lens of building a green home, but
Sure.
understanding really how the equipment and systems in your home work so that you can operate them as they've been intended to design. So
Hmm.
if you've got your AC on, your windows shouldn't be open. These are just basic practices that aren't followed.
Right.
Um,
Yes.
and there are so many passive solutions to save energy, like with your baseboard heaters and
Mhm.
conserving energy. I mean, there's just so much basic practices that go into this. So I think it, again, just comes down to education. Unfortunately, there isn't a central database for, in my opinion, of this sort of information. So you have to look at different resources, but
Yeah.
it's good to look to like your local utility. A lot of
Uh-huh.
the utility programs are providing incentives to, I don't know, to, let's say, for EV charging station installations at your home, or to
Sure.
solar. So I always say, if you're trying to build a green home, look to your utility provider first. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's all about becoming empowered and getting your own knowledge,
Yeah.
know what to ask the architect.
Yeah, and learning how to think about those things. I mean, learning which resources are good, which resources are reputable. I think that's great when you can look for incentives too, because there certainly are. They change, whether it's the IRS or the local utilities or local government, but
Right.
there are certainly incentives that have been around historically. Depending on other governmental factors, there's more than times than others when those are available. But from your perspective, as you've worked in local government, do you have favorite technologies that you've noticed that are trending, or favorite solutions that are providing green initiatives? Yeah, what are you seeing that you like?
Yeah, so a lot of homes and commercial projects are electrifying now. So that's the biggest thing, is the heat pump technology for heating and cooling. It's
Mm,
this sort of like a somewhat of like a passive approach to heating and cooling, because you're not really generating, you're not burning fossil fuels to do that. It's all clean electric heating and cooling. So a lot of our codes now are trending towards electrification, and that's for homes as well. Battery storage backup is also becoming more and more progressively researched, and that's because climate resiliency is at the forefront of every city's standards right now. I'm seeing it more on multifamily, large-scale apartment buildings, and not so much so
uh,
at the individual level, which is going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
but
Be-
but power redundancy that's built into buildings is becoming more common.
exactly, yes.
Hmm.
Battery storage backup specifically is hot right now. What's happening is that a lot of jurisdictions across the country, and I'll say it's mostly the larger ones, although there are smaller counties doing this, they're coming up with these climate action plans. So they have these resiliency plans that are recommendations, and they're not always requirements, and that's the problem. New York City recently turned its climate resiliency design guidelines into a requirement, and some other cities are doing that as well. They're making it code. But what's happening is that because they're becoming requirements, now they're being forced to map out 50 years from now, what is their flood risk? What's the increasing heat or increasing precipitation and sea level rise specific to their site, where maybe they wouldn't have thought about it before? And that's informing their design. You may not select a site now because of those issues that are going to come up by between
Yeah,
2050 and 2100. So
yeah,
resiliency is huge right now. And then for homes, another aspect with renewables is this concept of solar ready, which is in some codes, not adopted nationally. It's only a few jurisdictions right now have it. But solar ready means you allocate a portion of your roof to, you have to have enough square footage, and you have to have the infrastructure, that's the conduit,
hmm,
and a circuit breaker dedicated to potentially installing solar PV in the future. So New California is requiring solar PV for its new residential
really,
construction. New York City right now has a solar ready zone, which is what I just described. But if the codes start trending towards requiring the actual installation of solar, then that'll be interesting. And EV
yeah,
EV ready as well. So similar to
yeah,
solar ready, EV ready, where you have the capacity to install a charging station, that's come down on the residential level as a requirement for some New York City residential projects as well. So I
hmm,
think we'll start to see these trends trickle into the homeowner level. And as I mentioned, it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out on the individual homeowner level, because a lot of the sweeping changes are for larger commercial projects,
yeah.
and residential energy code is a lot smaller than the commercial code. And it's, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, it's also, I mean, you're talking about more densely populated states or blue states versus red states, and there's thinking that's unfortunately different about energy from state to state. You and I live in very different. Well, Georgia's becoming a little bit of a different kind of state lately, but the codes kind of go along with that, and the requirements kind of go along with that. But what do you predict? I mean, sounds like you're saying the thinking is changing. You know, the thinking around requirements is changing, and so new requirements are coming. Are those requirements? Do you think they'll be onerous and prohibitive in the market, or do you think like there's going to be empowerment around the marketplace and like in the private sector? Will people adopt these requirements well, or what do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it'll be onerous just because there's been such a slow adoption of code cycles from state to state. You know, not
Hmm.
everyone has adopted the same code,
Hmm.
and everyone's going at their own pace in a way, which I don't know if that's a good thing, but if we're talking about it being a burden, if each state is going at their own pace and adopting updated code cycles at a gradual pace, then they have that opportunity to ramp up and learn what the requirements are. And
Right.
also, if you have a lot of cities that are adopting more stringent codes, then they can share that with other jurisdictions to help
Hmm.
normalize that change
Yeah.
in the cycle. And I think that that's what needs to happen is a lot more knowledge sharing between city governments. But yeah, you know what's happening right now is cities are really taking the lead. So we've
Hmm.
got these stretch codes that have come out in some states where you're a city, you know, a state will adopt one version of the IECC, but a city can adopt the stretch code, which is this alternative compliance path that's more stringent than the baseline code. And
Hmm.
it basically allows the city to have a much more stringent requirement than what the state's allowing. And the states are
Yeah.
allowing cities to do this. So these cities now are influencing counties and smaller cities around them. So it's really interesting in the US to see this play out, like with cities coming out on top, the
Yeah.
states following through, and then it's state by state requirements. So it's because we have a lot of division here that you're not seeing national sweeping change, but I'm hopeful that the cities are going to continue to collaborate. In
Yeah.
the East, there are coalitions between city governments where sustainability professionals will exchange information on their standards to see what has worked, what hasn't worked, to help them develop their standards. So I just think that there hasn't been a lot of education to the general public, and it's more of like an
Right.
insider industry, you know, sort of thing. And because the public doesn't know this information, for them, the information might be hard hitting, and that's where it almost becomes a burden. But you have to really play up some of the economic benefits of this, and
Absolutely. Give people a reason to care.
yeah, and it has to be relatable. That's the other thing too.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
the codes, you know, the beauty of it is that the codes, and this is what I'm learning a lot more from working on the code committees, it's these codes are obviously adapted to local climatic conditions. So there's no one solution for every jurisdiction, but
Yeah.
you know, you have solutions that are tailored to your area. And I think cities are definitely engaging their communities, and in policy making there are open forums all the time. Anyone can get involved with influencing their code. They just have to be active about going to their city or state government's website and seeing where those code committee hearings are. So for anyone that's listening, I'd
Yeah.
encourage you to check out your local buildings department to see what public and stakeholder meetings there are for
Yeah.
people to get involved, because you have to raise these issues and someone in government will care. I strongly have a belief that public sector employees want to engage their communities, and it's just maybe not enough of the community is participating or doesn't care. So
Yeah. Well, here in the Atlanta area, I mean, you have such a big disparity between the thinking and the in the rural areas. I mean, Georgia's a big state, and New York's the same way. You've got a rural part and a more urbanized part, and so the
yeah,
county requirements here in North Georgia, where I live, are very different than in the city of Atlanta, where you have not only county restrictions, but city restrictions, and in some cases historical restrictions, and then there's neighborhood restrictions, and so there's a lot of people who want to weigh in on how building and how design happens, and it's different place to place.
yeah, every township, you know, it's funny you mentioned that. So New Jersey is the same way.
Yeah.
I first moved to New Jersey, I was like, what the heck is going on? Because I was so used to the New York City Buildings Department where you've got all five boroughs
Mhm.
following the same code. But I think it's similar in Georgia where each township just has its own rules. And then there are covenants and neighborhood agreements. So for example, and I learned this from a family member's residence in Georgia. You know, there are very harsh rules about putting up solar panels because some people perceive them as not aesthetically pleasing, which I strongly disagree with, for the record. But there are
Right.
restrictions like that that are baked
It's
into
so funny.
local agreements. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny what I guess beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but sometimes there's the subtext that people don't appreciate when they see things maybe that they're uncomfortable with.
Yeah, this is why, you know, you introduce panels on your home and you influence your neighbors, you get them on board, and all of a sudden it becomes the next cool thing. So
Right. Well,
gotta
what's
start.
funny, what's funny is that what I love about the people we're working with is that a lot of them are moving to the mountains, and they're not necessarily calling it off the grid living, but a lot of the reason why they want to be where they want to be is so that they can actually contribute positively to their environment. They want to build homes that, well, first of all, they don't want to be restricted by, what Betsy down the street's going to say about your solar panels, for example. But they also want to figure out a lifestyle that that is sustainable and that contributes positively to their environment, not taking away from their environment or not contributing negatively. So it's not that they're moving out just so they can do what they want, but a lot of our people are finding these places because they actually want to be good participants in the ecosystem around them, which I think is awesome. It's inspiring to me when people come to me with those values and say, like, we really want to incorporate this into our design. And you mentioned the ICC and the National Green Buildings Standard. I was curious about those two organizations. What's your involvement with them? What are they about?
Yeah, the ICC is for code professionals, so anyone who's interested in revising the code or just being on the forefront of understanding what the updates are.
Hmm.
So for anyone that's interested in influencing the codes, and that's what kind of where my interest is. You know, I've
Hmm.
just only recently gotten involved, but I'm involved with their Emerging Leaders Council, which is for younger code professionals. And there's a Sustainability Council as well, which I'll put out a plug for anyone that's interested in the green building sphere. But essentially, anyone that wants to participate in code hearings and be a part of that revision process, you know, these code cycles are 2, 3 years, so they are commitments in getting involved in the code cycle. But it's super fascinating work because it's the foundation of what we do. Um,
Yeah.
and then the National Green Building Standard, it's an ANSI-approved residential standard, and I'm on a code committee to help revise the next iteration of the standard. And we're looking at all sorts of issues from, well, I don't know if I can discuss specifics yet, but we're looking
Yeah.
at all sorts of issues in design and construction and revising the standards so that it's clear to the design professional and so that we can maintain a level of stringency and high performance in buildings. Yeah, because I work with code professionals from all different states, getting involved in these code committees really allows me to see the empowerment of knowledge sharing. So
Hmm.
everyone brings forth with them their experience in their particular cities, and it's interesting to understand how cities adopt to local climatic conditions and address solutions in the code their way. So I'm learning a lot when it comes to that. But
Yeah.
it's really reiterating to me how much cities need to work together as much as possible to understand like what some of the more streamlined compliance pathways are and
Yeah.
to understand maybe some of the administrative issues like permitting and how long it takes and what are certain buildings departments doing to expedite that. And
You,
you know, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, just wondering, do you find that there's like a camaraderie between city officials? Like, when do you pick up the phone, call somebody in Portland and be like, hey, what are y'all doing that's working? Is there like this kind of like shared love for what y'all are trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I can speak more to the Northeast because I'm more
Hmm.
familiar with that. But even in my experience in green building journalism and talking to folks from all over the country that are in government, and also being a little bit involved with ELGL, which is the Emerging Leaders in Local Government, which is a bunch of government professionals from all over the country. There's 100% a camaraderie. Everyone's really willing to share their information, and
Yeah.
when you go onto any government agency's website, you'll see a lot of their plans and their studies are outlined so clearly, like sustainability and climate action plans, their sustainability master plans. You can sort of see where their targets are. And when you take a look at the stakeholders that have been involved in drafting those plans, they're so comprehensive. It's like
Mm.
an entire process. So they're very passionate about sharing this information. And I just
Yeah.
think that there probably needs to be more platforms for cities to knowledge share. There have been
Hmm.
coalitions in the Northeast for sure that have done that, but I
Hmm.
don't know if maybe a professional from New York has engaged so much with someone from all over on the other side of the country.
Sure. Yeah.
When I was in the New York City Buildings Department, we definitely had connected with energy code professionals from
Yeah.
other cities, and we got training from people in other jurisdictions that were just as passionate. So, for
So
example,
cool.
Seattle is very progressive with their energy code, and so Seattle, New York, DC, and others, they're very much so in contact with what they've been doing, and they're also creating competition because
Yeah.
they're working together. It's which jurisdiction is doing what, and what are their targets, and how do we meet that, and everyone's driving each other too. So that's kind of like this other inherent benefit to working together.
Well, that's so heartening because I think, when we think about government and we think about politics and it's all, uh, regulation, everything, there's attitudes towards that. And there's certainly, I think sometimes in the public eye and in the media, you see a lot of the divisiveness and um, it's great to know that government actually probably some things that we don't really see
Mhm.
a lot of is people like you who are advocating for initiatives that are going to benefit
Mhm.
people for a long time, but you also have people who are in that fight with you and you're sharing that dream, you're sharing that passion, you're sharing that ambition to continue to pursue that mission together. And yeah, it's encouraging to know that there's people out there who like are part of that community, and are still pushing for that. We probably don't see that. We probably see like the fighting and the opinions on the public screen, but we don't see that the people who are actually working in government uh, actually care about what they're doing and they're doing meaningful work. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, and I think maybe all city agencies, and I know New York is definitely guilty of this, they don't always personalize what's going on behind the scenes. So the agency's work is represented as a collective agency effort rather than maybe giving credit to a particular team or an individual and their
Right.
contributions. Because I can off the top of my head, I know a few individuals in government, sustainability leaders that single-handedly were able to influence an agency to make a move. And those are the leaders and climate warriors and just government leaders that need to be highlighted, and that isn't
Yeah.
personalized enough. But yeah, I mean, I know that there's a sometimes a stigma with government work, and I have an issue with agencies that are slower to adopt change and not be as progressive. I work on a team where we're always introducing and piloting new technologies, and um, we have a leader who's very open about sharing new ideas and bringing them up to the company. So it really comes down to who your leadership is and if they're supportive. You do
Yeah.
get agencies that are slower to adopt changes, unfortunately, and a lot of times in government, something I've noticed as a 30 something year old is when you've got old timers in government agencies, they are very resistant to change, and they don't want to. I mean, they don't necessarily see change as a good thing, and that's a
Yeah.
mentality that needs to be broken. I have
Yeah.
seen that too,
Yeah.
unfortunately, but I think younger leaders are taking agencies by storm now. I think we need to have more younger folks in government for sure, and I think
Mhm.
that'll help drive change. Yeah.
Well, you're doing a lot of things right because I can see you taking to your platform and using it in a way to advocate for those changes and to be a thought leader. And that's so awesome. So thank you so much for
Oh,
taking the time to share some of those thoughts with us. And
yeah.
tell us what are some takeaways from anybody listening that you would love them to have? How would you like them to connect with you, or some resources that you find important that you're wanting to put a platform to?
Yeah, so on my personal website, and maybe we can link that in the show notes,
Absolutely. Yeah.
www.farahnazama.com. I have a tab called resources where I just keep an archive of organizations more specific to sustainability across the country. So there are some that are more local in New York, but then national ones that people can get involved with if they're interested in diving into sustainability, whether they're an architect or in another profession. There are so many ways to get involved in the climate change movement, whether it's in the design industry or not. But I just encourage everyone to maybe check out their local government and what work they're doing and see if they can get involved. You don't necessarily, you don't have to be a politician to influence change and influence policy. There are so many ways to get involved in the standards updates process. So I would definitely recommend that. And also, I can't speak enough about social media and leveraging your platform to
Yeah.
connect with like-minded folks and kind of banding together to create projects that you're passionate about and sharing your work. And for me, Instagram and Twitter and LinkedIn have certainly been ways to create a community and not only launch my brand or my work, but just educate others. And in the process of doing so, I meet people that have done different sorts of work and we find different ways to collaborate and we can connect like you and I have on a platform like this where we can share
Love
even
it.
more information and just dispel it. So I'm hopeful that I was able to maybe shed some light or provide a
Absolutely. I feel like, we had a woman on our most recent podcast episode, Gloria Cloder, who's an architect out of Tampa, Florida. She wrote a really awesome book called The Motherhood of Architecture. But one of the things that she said that I loved was she was talking about raising a child's very much like the way that we participate in architecture, that you bring something to life, but it takes a village. And it's fun, that we've been able to connect. We've through the podcast and just through being open, we've made some really great connections. And I do think it takes that village. It takes people with very different gifts, that are good at so many different things and passionate about so many different things. But all in all, we're building community, and that brings me a lot of joy. So, Farah,
yeah,
I do have a lot of joy over getting to talk about this with you. And
yeah.
yeah, I would love for people to connect with you, Farah. We're going to drop your Twitter links. That's how you and I met, was through Twitter. I also know you put some awesome stuff out on Instagram. I think you've done some podcasts with Demetrius Lynch and Mark Arlepage and some of the folks that we've connected with. If the She Builds ladies haven't connected with you yet, I hope they do. Have you been on their podcast yet?
Have not.
Yeah, I'm gonna hopefully, if you haven't been introduced to them, I'd love for them to connect with you. I might send them your way. But yeah, we've been able to build some really good connections, and I'm very grateful for the connection we got to build today, Farah. So hopefully we can keep the conversation going.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your platform and for creating community. It's so important to have podcasts and platforms like this pop up because the building industry, I feel like, even though we're large and we all know each other and it's a small, tight-knit community, they need more of a voice in national politics, and we don't get the credit or the voice that we should. So we have to continue to instrument our voices and share our perspectives so that people can understand the importance of the profession and understand how we as professionals can help clients and what services we do offer and what the value is. So by getting this information out there, we can kind of lay that credibility and foundation.
Absolutely. Well, we will definitely share out those links and promote those for folks who want to continue to learn and to learn how to think about sustainability. Farah, thank you so much. Have a great evening. We'll talk again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you.